Well, yeah, you're with the Carters.
Yes.
We had our picture taken with them at his church in Georgia.
That's where that is too, the Maranatha Baptist Church,
Yeah.
3 years ago.
This is inside the building. Our picture,
Ours was before that.
our picture was outside.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
And when did you meet them?
Well, that's more recent. We had built a house in the woods in Georgia that we had for about 10 years, and that was after we had retired from Heidelberg. I had promised Virginia that she would have a house in Georgia, and we managed to do that. We had it about 10 years, and then it got too much to keep up this place and that one. We'd spend the winter down there. So we finally sold it, and fortunately that was before the market fell. So we got out in the nick of time.
When we were there, we couldn't shake hands with him. They asked us not to do that, but if you stayed for the service, you got to have your picture taken with him.
Right.
So I asked the lady in charge, I said, well, how should we stand?
Oh,
Should I stand next to the president or my wife or who? And she said, who do you think you'd rather stand next to? I said, well, probably Edie.
yeah.
So
I don't know where our picture with them is at the moment, but we had one taken.
you mentioned meeting Jimmy Carter and John Glenn. How many other presidents have you met, Ken? Or who might some of them be?
Well, let's see. I think I did better with first ladies. I met Lady Bird Johnson, and I met, well, Mrs. Carter on another occasion. Well, I met Jerry Ford. At one time, I was going to do a book on him, and then my mother was still alive, and she lived to be about 94, and of course, as I'm doing now, she was failing at the end, and I had to spend more time with her. She was still living up in Cleveland in the family home, and I'd go up there regularly and stay with her and take care of things in the house and the yard. And she required so much attention that I couldn't really do the research, and I had a book contract for it, and I had to give that up.
Did you ever meet President Truman?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let me tell you about him, because I voted for the first time for president in 1948. See, I was not 21 years of age yet in 1944 when FDR ran for the fourth term. I had to be 21 to vote. Ohio hadn't changed the law. It's now 18. So my first vote was in 1946, but that was the midterm election. And I've voted in every election since 1946. But my first presidential vote was 1948. And I voted for Harry Truman. And to this day, I consider that the absolute best vote I ever cast for president. And because I got what I voted for. And how many times can you say that? You know, he balanced the budget 7 out of 8 years. He appointed a lot of very good people to the cabinet and other high positions. But this leads to another story. I don't remember the year, but we started out on our summer vacation, and we were going to go to Canada. We're going to go through Michigan and Wisconsin and into central Canada. Well, we got right up there near the border, and Virginia became ill. And we didn't think it was wise to keep going into Canada because it's so sparsely settled, you know, and we would have trouble getting medical attention. So we start back home, and we got about halfway back, and she recovered. Well, then what do you do with the vacation? And she said, you've always wanted to see these presidential sites in the Midwest. Let's go. So we went to see the Eisenhower home and library, the Hoover birthplace and library, and of course the Truman was there in Independence. Well, I happened, because I was very active in an organization called the Center for the Study of the Presidency, I knew the director of the Truman Library, and he was there in his office, and I made a courtesy call. Well, while we're sitting there talking to him, he suddenly said, have you ever met the president? No. Would you like him? Yeah. And the next thing we knew, we were being escorted to the private section of the Truman Presidential Library. And we got to a desk which was outside a double set of glass doors looking down an office corridor. And there was a police officer manning the desk. He pressed a button, the glass door swung open, and about halfway down the corridor, Harry Truman steps out in profile and turns and starts toward us. I can still hear Virginia say, oh my. And I had to think fast. What do you say when the president heading toward you? And fortunately, I made a good choice. I said, it's interesting to meet a Democrat who can carry Ohio. And he just threw back his head and roared with laughter. And he said, let me tell you about your governor. Well, at that time, in 1948, the governor of Ohio was a very interesting person named Frank Lausching. And he had been an office holder in Cleveland. He held the job which made him the lawyer for the city. And in the case of the Cleveland Constitution, he was next in line to be mayor. So when the current mayor resigned the job, Lausching became mayor of Cleveland. Now this is the 1930s, when there were a lot of mobsters in the United States. It was at the time when Eliot Ness became a very important safety director, and he got his start in Cleveland. And you had all these desperados, Machine Gun Kelly, Pretty Boy Floyd, and Ma Barker and her sons, and John Dillinger. And Dillinger robbed the bank in Fostoria, which is the next town over.
No kidding.
From Tiflin. Well, from that modest start, Lauschy, who was the son of Slovenian immigrants, rose steadily till he became U.S. Senator for 2 terms, a full 6 years. And he lived to be 95.
Wow.
And was still driving his old car in Washington, D.C. And he would rev it up every time he started. He thought you had to do that. And he never had an accident. And he'd drive that car back and forth between Washington, D.C. and Ohio.
My
And he was obviously Catholic with his Slovenian background, but he married a Protestant woman. I can't remember her last name, maiden name, but her first name was Jane. And she became a private pilot. So while he was a 5-term governor of Ohio, he still has the record. Nobody will ever equal that because, we have a law against that. Now, you can't serve that many terms. She would fly him to all his political engagements around the state. And she flew him into the local airport just north of Tiflin for our May Day in 1952, which was my first teaching year at Heidelberg. And he was a very conservative Democrat, so much so that the Eisenhower people considered him as a running mate in 1952. Well, he did not get the nomination, but he was very prominent. He was on the final list. It would have been interesting. And because he was such a conservative Democrat, he got all kinds of Republican votes. That's how he got this record of 5 terms. Well, at our May Day, he crowned the May Day Queen. That we still had a May Day ceremony. We don't have that anymore. That sort of thing is sort of passé now. But we had a reception for him in the former library at Heidelberg. Did you point that building out where my office was?
That was the one that would have been by itself, kind of in that island of roads there off to the left.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the reading room was that whole first floor, most of it. There were a few offices. I inherited the librarian's office. I had the finest faculty office on campus. It was a corner office with great windows, and I could see much of the campus from it. And I had my own private John, and that's the only one on campus to this day. The president doesn't have that in his office in the main building that you probably got in. So and the reason I got that was I had been chairman of the new library committee and had spoken out several years for having a new library. Well, that gave me an edge when this became a new building for humanities faculty.
All right.
That was important because we weren't like the science teachers. They were all together in their own building. And they still are. They're in a new building.
Oh, I see.
Today. The humanities people were scattered all over the campus. Well, when we built the new library, the old library became a humanities center.
Oh.
And most of the humanities professors had their offices there, and they taught in some of the classrooms as well.
And you want to get back to Truman.
Yeah. Well, Lauschi's governor of Ohio when Truman is running in 48. And Truman made, as you know, whistle stops
Yes.
all over the U.S. And he came to Ohio for about a week of whistle stopping. He didn't get to Tiffin, he got to Fostoria, and the head of our speech department took some of his majors over there to hear Truman. And a recording was made of that, and I eventually inherited the recording because
Really?
of my interest in presidents. The
All right.
chairman, when he retired, gave it to me.
Nice.
And I had a copy made, and it got eventually to the White House.
Really?
But yeah, but all this stuff runs together, and I apologize for dragging this out, but it was an interesting experience.
Yes.
And because Lauschi was a very conservative Democrat who didn't think Truman would win the election anyway, he did not, as sitting governor, welcome Truman to the state of Ohio. He didn't meet the train. But about halfway through the week, Lauschi was a good enough politician. He realized that Truman was picking up momentum. And so he intercepted the train in Dayton and rode with him the rest of the week. Well, that's the story that Truman told Virginia. That's why he laughed so heartily telling the story.
Right. He caught up with him.
He enjoyed that hugely.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's a great story.
Well, he's not finished.
Oh, well, good. Okay. Let's hear the rest of it.
Well, we went on to the stage.
Oh, yeah. After we had a private meeting there in the private part of the library, the director and the president said, well, why don't you come with us and we'll go into the auditorium. They announced over the loudspeaker system that they were going to do this, and anyone touring the building was welcome to come to the auditorium to see the president. Well, we walk on stage, and everybody wonders who we are, and we sat on stage. And Harry Truman liked to talk to children, and he invited a lot of children to ask questions. And of course he played the piano, you know, but he was a very good pianist. When he was a youngster, he studied piano with good teachers, and he even went to Kansas City to get an expert pianist. He was very good playing classical music. And well, when the Kennedys invited him to the White House, you know, they gave a dinner for him, and he was in his 80s then.
Wow.
He played the White House piano.
Is that right?
Classical music, and did it perfectly.
Amazing.
To everyone's amazement. Now, he's the only president that didn't have a college degree of the, you know, the 20th century.
Is that right?
But that's very misleading about his education. His mother went to college in Missouri for 2 years while her children were small, including Harry. And she was very good at art and music and history. And she taught him, she's the one that started him with piano lessons, but she kept passing him on to better teachers. So he had an excellent musical education, and he played the piano the rest of his life, you know, as I've indicated.
I see.
He was very good at it.
Yes.
Well, he had poor eyesight, but he became a great reader, and he was interested in presidents, so he had a big collection of books on all the American presidents up to his time, and he read all those books. We saw him when we visited the Truman home on this trip that we made as a result of the broken route, you know, in her illness. And it was a great experience to meet him as a result of all that. And especially because of my hobby of presidents. I became interested as a boy in presidents, and it ended up that I became very active nationally in the field of the presidency.
Yes.
And I was an officer in several organizations involving presidents, and I held conferences. Well, when I retired at Heidelberg, I planned, and it was over my birthday weekend in May, a conference on the American presidency. It just so happened that I retired in 1989. Well, that was the 200th anniversary of the American presidency. So I got this idea to hold the conference on the Heidelberg campus involving all the presidents up to 1989. And I brought in from the Midwest and as far as Iowa experts on all these individual presidents. And it was a 2.5-day conference, and I included the vice presidency because I knew a woman at Emmanuel College in Boston who had written a good book on the vice presidency, which I had reviewed in Presidential Quarterly. I was the book review editor of Presidential Studies Quarterly, which was a national scholarly journal. It's still in existence, but I'm not active anymore in the group. I stayed pretty active for 25 years after my retirement, but when I got to 90, I drifted away. You know, I couldn't keep up anymore with the travel and the walking. I learned to drive at 16. My father taught me in a Model A 1931 Ford with a rumble seat. I drove for 75 years, but then at 91 I voluntarily quit because my eyesight and my hearing, you know, even in a small town like Tiffin, wasn't good enough. I miss it terribly because in my lifetime I drove well over 1 million miles, and I never had an accident that I caused.
Wow.
But I wasn't the best driver in the family. You know, Virginia's better and Richard and Robert.
Oh.
But at least I didn't cause an accident or hit any animals. I hit some birds. You can't hardly avoid doing that. But I'm thankful I was in some accidents where other people hit me. But I quit while I was ahead of the game.
Good idea.
Yeah. But I do miss it very much.
Yes.
Even though Virginia and the boys take me places.
That's nice. What kind of Ford was it? A Model T?
No, the Model A.
Was
1931.
Was that still in any color you wanted as long as it was black?
No, the car that my father had was, it had black fenders, but the body was a nice shade of tan.
Oh,
And,
nice.
And the rumble seat, of course, closed when you weren't using it. You know, it lifted up and it folded back. One time we were in Buffalo visiting my mother's people, and we went across to Canada. My mother and I were in the rumble seat, and my grandmother and father were up front in that seat. And it started out a wonderful day like today, but while we were still in Canada, a sudden summer rainstorm hit, and all my mother and I could do was crawl underneath and pull the rumble seat cover over us. The next thing we knew, we're going through customs on the Peace Bridge in downtown Buffalo, which connects Fort Erie and Buffalo. And we heard them say, you know, where were you born and all that stuff. Well, fortunately, they didn't open the rumble thing, or we would have had a lot of explaining to do.
My dad has another
I remember
story.
that stuff better than things that happened a couple years ago.
He says you've got another story. Robert does.
Why don't you tell the story about going back to see where you were born?
Oh, I was born in East Cleveland. Now today, that is one of the most dangerous communities in the United States.
Really?
Very dangerous. Oh, there's been all kinds of murders and violence, and robberies, and so on. It was a perfectly fine place when I was born there in 1924. Well, you know from yesterday's conversation that Virginia and I have done a lot of family history and genealogy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was born a few minutes after 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning. And I was born in the family apartment. It was a four-family apartment building in the arts and crafts style. And I think it's still standing today, as far as I know. But it was on Scioto Avenue in East Cleveland. Well, I've always enjoyed my birthday when it falls on Sunday.
Yes.
And my 84th birthday was going to be a Sunday. And I got a project going that winter of documenting the houses in Cleveland where the family had lived. And I went and photographed them and so on. I had never seen my birthplace. And I had seen presidential birthplaces, other famous people in various countries, and I wanted to see where I was born. So with Richard's help, we drove to Cleveland. I think it was this Buick, wasn't it? Yeah, because we bought that in 2002, 15 years ago.
I don't remember.
Huh?
I don't remember.
Yeah, it's got to be this car. And I went up a week ahead of time. It was a Saturday, wasn't it?
Till the weekend.
Yeah, it was a weekend. And rang the doorbell. I knew it was the apartment on the left side of the building on the first floor. And nobody answered the doorbell. And I went with a police officer, because the neighborhood was dangerous at this time, and I had a relatively new car. I didn't want anything happening there. And I wanted the police officer there so that whoever answered the door would be comfortable seeing strangers. And we were just ready to give up after knocking and ringing the doorbell when the door opened a crack. And it was a very nice black lady who was a nurse in a children's hospital. And I explained that I had been born in the back bedroom in 1924, and I'd never seen my birthplace, and it was, my birthday was coming up in a week. Would it be possible for me to see it? And she was very cordial. She said, I'm going to be working on that Sunday, but I'll have my sister come and open the apartment for you. So we went back on my birthday with the police escort again, and Richard stayed outside with the car so it wouldn't be vandalized. And of all things, the sister gave me a little box, and when I opened it up, it was a white cake. And of course I wrote letters of appreciation in advance, and I gave $20 to the police department for their help. They always have some fund, you know, some kind. And I gave $20 as my admission to the apartment and the bedroom.
Nice.
And it turned out to be the smallest bedroom I've ever seen in my life.
Really?
Very tiny. You could put your hands out and touch opposite.
Oh my.
That's where I was born.
Amazing.
Well, in 1924, my parents didn't have an automobile. In fact, they didn't get one till he got that 31 Ford.
Really?
They never owned a car. And there was no telephone. And my father ran 6 blocks to get to a public phone at a car barns for the East Cleveland streetcars. And the doctor didn't make it, but the nurse did. And she insisted my mother in my birth.
Wow. Amazing.
So, Virginia didn't want me to go because it was such a dangerous neighborhood. And I was determined I wanted to do this. And with the help of police, it worked out.
That's amazing. That's an amazing story, Ken.
The fact that even though I taught in a small college, and Heidelberg had smaller students than, a smaller enrollment then than now, I became the president of the college history professors in the state of Ohio.
Wow.
I had an organization called the Ohio Academy of History. And I was up against all the university people, Ohio State,
Well, that's
Miami,
amazing.
and Bowling Green, and Toledo, and about 50 or 60 small college faculties.
Right.
But I was very active in the group, and I had been secretary treasurer, and I became vice president and president.
Right.
Well, how many students did you have over the years that went on into history-related work? Didn't you tell me it was over 70?
I think so. I had a record on cards at one time, and that's around somewhere in a file box.
That's professional.
Of course, a lot of them are
Mm-hmm.
deceased now. I've outlived a lot of my own students.
Mm.
I didn't expect that to happen, but you know, sometimes they're in auto accidents or they have a serious illness and their life is shortened.
Absolutely.
Scholarship to what university?
That was the hardest blow I ever took. His name was Robert Sayer, and he was from Ohio.
Singer?
Sayer.
Oh, Sayer.
Sayer.
Robert Sayer.
Yeah, and he was a minister. He was, of course, married, and he had some small children. But he was one of my good majors in American Studies. And he wanted to go on to get a doctorate in the field. And there have been several great places with doctoral degrees in American Studies, and one of them was Indiana University. Well, that's the place I frequently took my majors on a field trip if they were interested in getting a master's or a doctorate. So I knew their faculty, they knew me, and I had invited those professors to come and visit my classes at Heidelberg and give a lecture. Well, he applied for this scholarship that was good straight through to the doctorate. 3 years, all expenses paid. There were 33 applicants across the United States. He got it. And then he turned it down.
Oh
I
my!
nearly died. I had pulled every string I knew to get him that appointment. Well, subsequently, he did go to a different graduate school and got a doctorate.
Did he?
And I was pleased that he finally did
I
it.
thought he became a minister, Ken.
Huh?
Didn't he become a minister?
Well, he was already a minister when he started at Heidelberg. Of course, he stopped preaching at that point. He was a full-time student. And he had a scholarship here. And you could earn money in the summer.
Do you recall what church he was affiliated with?
No, I don't. He ended up teaching at Millersburg in your state. I've never been to that campus.
Really? Did he go on then to become a professor, or
Yes.
did he go back into the ministry at all?
No, he also became a
A
professor.
professor.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the end, it worked out.
Yes.
He didn't leave the field totally.
Right. Right.
But, when he gave up that prime appointment,
It's a
I
shock.
was fit to be tied.
Yeah.
Not long afterward, she sent me a thank you, which I've kept. You don't normally get a letter marked the White House on
Yeah.
and the First Lady's signature.
Well, tell them who you met on your honeymoon. Well, you didn't really meet him, but you saw him when you went to England. Churchill?
Oh, yeah, Churchill.
Yeah, there was one nice summer evening when the group we were part of had some open time, and we went various places, and Virginia and I decided we'd go to Parliament, which was having a big debate at the time. I forgot what the issue was, but we got to see a lot of famous politicians there, and when they take a vote, they do it differently than our Congress. Everybody leaves the room, and then they re-enter by one of two doors, and of course that's for or against. Well, Churchill had not been present during the debating part of it, but he did come in to cast a vote, and of course instantly we recognized him, and he had the whole front bench to himself, and he was beautifully attired, a wonderful suit, everything just perfect, and he sat there. We were up in the gallery looking right down. But
Amazing.
Virginia and I weren't sitting together. We couldn't get two side-by-side gallery seats, but we looked at each other.
Did he speak or do anything at the meeting, Churchill?
No, he just voted.
He just came to vote.
Yeah, he just came to vote.